Welcome and thank you for standing by. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode until the question and answer of today's conference. At that time, you may press star 1 on your phone to ask a question. This conference is also being recorded. If you have any objections, please disconnect your line at this time. I would now like to turn the conference over to Kim Davis. Thank you. You may begin.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for another Census Academy webinar, On the Map, the Road to Employment Dynamics. We are recording today's webinar, and it will be available on Census Academy within the next couple of weeks. And we also will be hosting a Q&A session at the end of today's session. We have a large number of participants with us today, so we ask that the participants ask only one question and one follow-up question during the Q&A session. If you have questions, you are also welcome to enter them into the chat feature, and we will address the questions as we participate in the webinar today. If we don't get all of the questions in chat answered, we will follow up at the end via email to our participants. We also will be asking for your feedback at the end of today's presentation in a brief evaluation survey that will pop up on your screen when you close out of the event. And presenting today will be Eric Coyle, who serves as a data dissemination specialist for the U.S. Census Bureau. He is responsible for building and maintaining relationships with stakeholders through the dissemination of census data and information. Mr. Coyle's primary responsibilities are to plan, coordinate, and implement data dissemination and outreach. We have joining Mr. Coyle our subject matter expert, Ms. Erlene Dowell. She is a program analyst for the Data Users Trade and Outreach Branch at the U.S. Census Bureau. Dowell has been promoting and training people on the Longitudinal Employer-Household Dynamics products for over 10 years. Prior to joining the LEHD program, Dowell played a key role during the 2010 census in the Public Information Office and taught communication courses at the College of Southern Maryland. Dowell received her master's degree in communication and a bachelor's degree in public relations from Hawaii Pacific University. Welcome to both of our presenters today, and for sharing your expertise, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kim. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning for this very exciting webinar on a particular favorite tool of mine called OnTheMap. And let me go ahead and share the agenda. So we will be covering the background of this tool, which is the LEHD, Longitudinal Employer-Household Dynamics program, and which is the umbrella for the LED partnership program, where these tools come from specifically today on the map. I also want to make sure we have a clear understanding of what the NAICS system is, NAICS code system, North American Industry Classification System, which is the system we use to identify businesses in the United States. So we will also look at census geography, as it is the framework of the data, and there are some really amazing things you can do with OnTheMap because it does get down to some pretty low levels of geography you may not be familiar with. We'll show you, then I will pass the baton over to my colleague, Erlene, who is our subject matter expert for the LHD program, and she will show you some examples and then do a live demo as well. I'll show you some additional resources, and then, of course, we'll have time for some Q&A at the end. As Kim pointed out, this webinar is being recorded and will be shared eventually on Census Academy, where you can access the recording and materials. So with that, let's go ahead and get started and get started with our virtual road trip today. And so when you talk about LEHD and LED, there tends to be some confusion with, which is which and what does what in regard to LEHD versus LED. So the LEHD, Longitudinal Employer-Household Dynamics, is essentially, as I just mentioned, the umbrella for the LED partnership, and I'll talk about that more. But essentially the program, the LEHD program, is part of the Center for Economic Studies at the Census Bureau, and this program produces new, cost-effective public use information combining federal, state, and Census Bureau data on employers and employees under this LED partnership. So it's really that sort of what formulates that partnership. What creates it. So what is the partnership? What is the LED partnership? Well, you can see that basically it began in the late 90s with only a few states, and we had actually nearly all 50 states at one point, or we had all 50 states at one point, I think. Then we had, I think Wyoming wasn't participating. But now we have 3 states that are just, choosing not to share. It's not a mandatory partnership. If states choose not to share their data, they don't have to. But state and local authorities, they increasingly need detailed local information about their economies to make informed decisions. So the LED partnership actually works to fill critical data gaps and provide indicators needed by state and local authorities. And under the LED partnership, states do agree to share unemployment insurance earnings and the quarterly census of employment and wages data. So they choose to share that information with us. And so those 3 states that aren't participating right now are currently Alaska, Arkansas, Mississippi. And Puerto Rico and Virgin Islands we are not producing data for. But you can still get previous year data for those 3 states in quarterly workforce indicators Explorer tool. So, and some states, they've opted out in the past and they've opted back in, so you never know. We do update that. You can go onto the LEHD website and look at state partners, and it'll tell you and keep you up to date as far as who's participating and who is not, and what the date is from that recent update. And I just realized you guys weren't able to see this slide, and this is the slide I was just talking about. Now, let me go further on. So the LED data provides unprecedented detail about America's jobs, workers, and local economies, as well as a longitudinal record of U.S. employment. So by integrating this existing data from the state-supplied administrative records on workers, employers, to create this longitudinal data system on U.S. employment, state-of-the-art methods to protect confidentiality of the original respondents allow the LED to release data for local and regional areas beyond traditional boundaries for public use on the Internet. And that is what allows us to get down to these low-level geographies by that state-of-the-art methods to protect confidentiality. Because if any of you are familiar with Census Bureau data, that's the most paramount aspect of our data is privacy protection. Federal law protects individuals and businesses from any of their data being compromised. So therefore, those same state-of-the-art methods are very crucial and important to the LED data that is published. But really, essentially, the LED is an integral part of the Department of Commerce's Open Government Plan to really, unlock a lot of this incredible public access, public domain data, and to really increase participation in the use of that data. That's what we want to see. We want to see more people get access to this data, to use our data, to leverage the data however they see fit. So now when you're building on these state inputs, you can see that, by combining this data, what we're able to do by combining it with survey data, state records, et cetera, and it allows us to look at and create statistics on firms, establishments, jobs and workers, and which also really crucially important is the firm and person characteristics like age, sex, race, ethnicity. All that information is there in these different tools that we have available and on the map. You can look at different aspects of workers. You can look at workers and sort of select them by either age or sex or race or ethnicity. And really the most important aspect of this probably is the fact that there is no new respondent burden. So there isn't a new survey that's going out and trying to get responses from people. This is actual data that currently exists, and we're just combining it together to create these public data access tools. So when you look at, how does that all come together, you can see here, in regard to the firm data, that's your quarterly census of employment and wages, your economic survey data, the business register. Then you look at that jobs data, that's your unemployment insurance wage records, the OPM data, as well as federal records for that household data, demographic census survey data. Right, so all that gets mashed into our well-oiled machine that is the LEHD program through our LED partnership, and we're able to create these public use data products. And these products are pretty amazing. As you can see, we have quite a few. Let me see here. There we go. We have quite a few of these products. The flagship product was actually the quarterly census of employment and wages. Now, the flagship product was the quarterly workforce indicators, which provides information about trends in employment and hiring, job creation and destruction and earnings, and really unprecedented detail on geography, age, sex, and industry, going as far back as 1990. Right? The second data product is the LEHD Origin Destination Employment Statistics, or LOADS. Yes, that's probably officially the Guinness Book of World Records' longest acronym, because the L in LOADS stands for Longitudinal Employer-Household Dynamics. So that provides annual employment statistics linking home and work locations down to the census block level. So that's the incredible tool that we're going to be looking at today primarily. Of course, we do have the job-to-job flows, tracing worker movements through industries, geographic labor markets, the post-secondary employment outcomes, which is a new experimental set of statistics, looking at earnings and employment outcomes of graduates. So that's a really post-secondary institutions. It's a really fascinating, really great tool as well. I highly recommend, after this webinar, and we're focused on OnTheMap today, to really take the time to look at these other tools that are available from the LEHD program, because they are really fascinating, and there's some really cool stuff you can do in terms of the visualizations within these tools. All right, we also have the Veterans Employment Outcomes. That's the brand new experimental statistics on looking at earnings and employment of Army veterans after discharge. So that's another really great new tool coming from this program. And as you can see, we are really giving you lots of great data and showing you how this partnership, this LED partnership, how we can leverage it to really give you all this incredible longitudinal information and sort of workforce characteristics, and it's all coming from existing data, so keeping it at a relatively low cost to do all this work. Now, giving you this insight is really important, but getting access to it 24/7 is really what's incredible and wonderful about these data products, because it is free to the public 24/7. You can access it. This is all public domain data. And with that, I now want to go into the North American Industry Classification System, because that is the system that we use to identify and classify our businesses in the U.S., and what is the sort of tabulation, the universe in which we tabulate data on businesses and industries from the LHD program. So it's really important to have just a good understanding of the NAICS industry, which started in 1997 as part of NAFTA. It is hierarchical, and meaning that we have a 2-digit NAICS code, and then there is all the way to a 6-digit NAICS code. As you can see, that 2-digit is really going to represent that main sector, like retail, trade, construction, mining, etc. The subsectors will get you more into detail in regard to that particular industry, right? Now, for OnTheMap, there is only the 2-digit NAICS codes currently available. So you can only look at industries at the 2-digit NAICS codes. However, the QWI, the Quarterly Workforce Indicators tool, does allow you to go from 2 to 3 to 4-digit NAICS. But limitations, more detail in industry means less granularity, so you can only get down to the county level in that particular tool. So keep that in mind. The codes are updated every 5 years, and years that end in 2 and 7. And so the last update to the NAICS code was 2017. And that also coincides with our economic census. You can actually go onto our website, onto census.gov. NAICS has its own separate website, but I often recommend if you're looking for census data in regard to NAICS, a good place to start is in our website. So you can actually go to census.gov/NAICS, and you can go in there and look at the manual, the 2017. You can look at previous year manuals as well and sort of look at the difference in those changes for industries. Now, industry changes in the code system are really for the primary reasons of industries, either new industries emerging or other industries disappearing altogether, right? So millennials that may be, or Gen Z may be on the webinar may not be familiar with record stores, right? Or stores that just sold TVs or stereo equipment or something like that. And so those stores kind of went the way of the dodo, and now that code goes away as well when there's not as many of those industries to merit having its own code. So they get consolidated into what would be electronic stores, right? So that would cover any of those industries that are still left out there. And then, of course, new codes created for those new industries like, renewable energy industries, geothermal or solar, et cetera. Now, into geography, this is also really important because geography is the framework of the data. And most people are familiar with legal areas and legal concepts of geography, regions, divisions. But when you even look at something like a census-designated place, so, region is going to be like Northeast, Midwest, et cetera. Division is a collection of states within those regions. But a census-designated place, not everybody is really familiar with the term places. Like, what is a place? And so the Census Bureau uses the term place in many of its data tools. And if you're not familiar with what a place is or the term that we use, it's essentially the term we use to describe all cities and towns. So that's important to understand. When you see that listed under counties, you'll see, place and tract and zip code or zip code tabulation area. I'll talk about that more in a second. But it's important to understand that distinction and that term that we use in many of our data tools to identify all cities and towns. So a census-designated place is an important geography because it's essentially an area that is unincorporated and has been basically requested by the county to tabulate data for this particular area. So the county provides the boundaries for that unincorporated area, and then we go ahead and gladly tabulate data for it. So it's a cooperation between state local governments and the Census Bureau to tabulate data for those unincorporated areas that we refer to as census-designated places. Now, not all unincorporated areas are automatically CDPs. Again, it's in cooperation with state and local governments, so if it's not requested, it may not be identified as a CDP. And then another really important, I won't get into the census county divisions, that would be for those unincorporated areas that are not CDPs, that basically fall within the county boundaries, or the PUMA as much. But what's really great about this OnTheMap tool is you can look at zip code tabulation areas, which are important. We use that for population. Most of the population is aware of zip codes and the fact that they're owned by the post office, and the post office can do pretty much whatever they want with them, and that's great for the post office. They use them to deliver the mail. That's extremely important. But for a statistical agency, we actually need some level of permanence. So we created zip code tabulation areas, which allows us to then look at basically remove any of those zip codes that are attached to a P.O. box or a large postal customer. So the OnTheMap tool will allow you to look at those zip code tabulation areas for data on the population. And then you have another really important geography, which is probably one of the most important that I usually share with my data users out there, and that is a census tract. Now, a census tract is a is a subdivision of a county based on population thresholds. And for a census tract, that threshold is 1,300 to 8,000. So that threshold is extremely important because it's what allows us to look at these tracts and maintain a sort of standard for how we want these tracts in terms of the population. I think I said 3,200. It's actually 1,200 to 8,000, and we optimize them for 4,000. So when you're looking at the screen, you're actually looking at a collection of census tracts, and you may notice that some of the tracts have similar numbers and some are completely different. Some like 231,210 or 231,220. And at one point, that was actually just one whole tract. But as the population increased over time, that tract had to be split to make sure that it did not go beyond the threshold of 8,000. Now, this happens once every 10 years at the time of each decennial, and it's very important to note that they are relatively permanent and firmly based on physical boundaries and meant to nest within counties. So, again, they are subdivisions of counties, and that is their nesting area. They can coincide or correlate with cities and towns out there, but they're not bound by those particular boundaries. So below a census tract level, you'll have block groups. That is also based on population size, and for block groups, you're looking at 600 to 3,000 pop size for those particular areas. Those are the subdivisions of tracts. And then the lowest level of geography is the block. And within this particular tool, and on the map, you can get down to the census block. So what does that look like when you put it all together? I love showing this because it really gives a clear picture of how these geographies are created and what that full puzzle picture looks like. So a census block is not based on population size or housing units. There is a formula that goes into creating a census block, and in urban areas, it will pretty much mirror city blocks or, and urban areas. As you get out to suburban and rural areas, it's kind of going to go a little bit all over the place and expand and get really far out there. And again, that's because it's not based on population size or housing units. But it is firmly based on physical boundaries. So just keep that in mind. Now, within the OnTheMap tool, if you were actually because you can actually use a polygon feature in OnTheMap to create your own geographic area. You can upload shape files, all that kind of stuff, lots of cool features. But if you were to try to go ahead and split that block with your line, depending on where that line falls within the centroid of that block, it's either going to remove the block from your map, from your data, your analysis, or it's going to pull it in. Okay, so keep that in mind. You cannot split a block in OnTheMap. All right, so that's important to understand. The block, though, not based on population size or housing units, will attach to block groups based on that pop size I mentioned before, 600 to 3,000, is going to combine with other block groups to form a census tract. So in tract 107, which you're looking at here on your screen, you actually have a collection of 4 block groups, and you have multiple blocks within those block groups. All right, now that tract then combines with all your other tracts that you see to form your county. Now, the really important aspect about tracts is no matter how many times that tract gets split, let's say tract 107 here, it's at the time of the decennial census, so they've got to go ahead and look at all the tracts and figure out which ones have increased over the past 10 years and which ones need to be split. So if you split this tract, no matter how many times you got to split it based on the population, that tract, the frame of that tract will never change. It'll always stay in its original frame. And that allows you to go ahead and aggregate that data if it's been split and compare it with the previous tract data. So that's a really great feature of our census tracts. And just to kind of give you an overall hierarchy view, I know it's kind of a scary looking slide there to see all these different geographies, but it gives you kind of an overall picture of the really important geos that we have, statistical areas that we have, like tracts and block groups, and the blocks. And just a reminder that places represent cities and towns, including CDPs, just designated places. Okay, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass the baton on to my colleague, Erlene, and she's going to give you some examples, some real examples using OnTheMap, and then actually take you online as well to show you how to recreate those examples. So Erlene, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Okay, great. Hopefully everyone can see my screen. So thank you so much to the Census Academy and to Eric Coyle for allowing me to share with you some of the real examples using OnTheMap during COVID-19. What we're going to be doing, I will share 2 examples with you, and then I will demo some of OnTheMap features, and then I'll go over the second example, and then we'll work through the second example together. Zillow wrote an article about rapid movement towards remote work arrangements in the wake of the pandemic. This raises an interesting question on the future of urban workers. Will workers place less value on living near a downtown job center? Though it's too soon to answer this question, Zillow found that 8.2 million U.S. workers that live in cities travel to the suburbs to work. In the article, 25 out of the country's 35 metro areas, such as San Francisco, Boston, Riverside, Tampa, and Orlando, tend to work in the suburbs or rural areas. The article also looked at age as characteristic, which was the same across the board and not subject to younger population as one would expect. So using Tampa as the selected area and the inflow-outflow analysis, we can see how many workers live in Tampa and how many of those workers leave Tampa to work in the suburbs. So here we can see that out of 140,663 workers that live in Tampa, 85,168 leave Tampa to work outside of the city. This is 60% of workers traveling out of the city to work. Also using the inflow-outflow analysis, if you look at the table on the right-hand side, and we are definitely going to work through this as the demo, you can see that age 29 and younger workers, through the data tool, we know that workers equaled 58,180. Age 30 to 54 doubled with 121,759. And age 55 and up totaled 49,433. So let me go live to demonstrate how easy it is to recreate this example and show you another analysis of how far people are traveling to the outside of the city and the directions they are traveling to. So if I go to onthemap.ces.census.gov, we'll do this together, but just to show you how the example regarding Tampa works. So here's OnTheMap, and we go ahead and click on the search box, and I'm going to type in Tampa. Once I type in Tampa, I'll click on search, and every geography that has the word Tampa pops up. So since we're looking at the metro area, I'm going to go ahead and click on the area that says micropolitan areas, and I'm going to click on Tampa, St. Petersburg, Clearwater, Florida. And then once that happens, a pop-up comes up, and then we can see the selected area that we've chosen. We can see how many square miles are in that selection. We can see how many census blocks are in that selection. And the great thing about all of our data tools is that it's very intuitive. So it's obvious what you're going to click next. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Perform Analysis on Selection Area. So once I'm there, it gives me another pop-up box, and it gives me the analysis settings. So in the first column, it says home or work. This is where you can choose whether you want to look at where workers live or where workers work. That's the big thing about OnTheMap. It connects where the worker lives and where the worker works. The next column is the analysis type. So we have 5 different analyses that we have listed here, but we can do other things and more custom to whatever that you might be looking at. So here, the first one is the area profile, and that's just it. We look at an overview of the area that we're looking at, and it can tell you what the age, what the earnings are, what the sex, what the race, what the ethnicity, what your educational attainment is, and then it looks at the NAICS as well. The area comparison compares, you can compare earnings, you can compare age, you can compare zip codes, you can compare counties, and all sorts of different other earnings. Distance direction tells you where they're coming from and how many miles they're coming from. And then destination tells you what place they're coming from, or what city they're coming from, what county they're coming from, and you get to choose what you would like to look at. And then the inflow, outflow is what we looked at earlier, and that just tells us how many people travel into the selected area to work, how many people live and work within the selected area, and how many people travel out of the selected area to work. And then the next column is year. So here you can choose all the different years. So if there is a state that doesn't have a certain year, you will get a message that says data not yet for this state. But a lot of times we're just processing the data and it's just being added. And then job type is the jobs that you have out there. So all jobs is every single job that you might have out there. Primary jobs is the one that brings home the most money. And these two, the all jobs and primary jobs, include the federal jobs, but that's for 2015 and through 2010. We are still putting in the 2016, 2017 data for the federal government, federal workers, and that should be updated by this year. And then all private jobs is just that. It's just the private sector, and then the primary is the private sector that brings home the most income. So as I said, everything is very intuitive, but we're going to go ahead and click on inflow, outflow in the second column down at the bottom. And then I'll click this lightning bolt, bold, gold with an exclamation point. And then hopefully you can all see that now that we see that there are 266,552 people that travel into Tampa to work, 846,714 live and work within Tampa, and then there's 250,231 that live in Tampa but travel out of Tampa to work. So on the right side, you can see the table, and the one that we're interested in is the living in the selected area but employment outside. So if I click on that, the map updates and the VIN updates, and we're just looking at the 250,231. But we have another feature where you go on the left side where it says all workers. I can click on all workers, and then we can look at the worker age, which is what the article talked about. So here we can look at worker age, and then we can see 29 or younger, and then this updates the VIN, the table and the VIN updates, and you can see the arrow. Now we're looking at 63,697. Those that were living in that area are traveling out of the area, 29 and younger. We can click on that again, and we can look at 30 to 54. And then once again, everything updates, and we can see that those that are 30 to 54 living in the area, traveling out of the area, is about 131,832. And then finally, the worker age for the 55 or older, we have about 54,702 in Tampa traveling out of Tampa to work. So the other thing is, like, where are they going to work out of Tampa? So if I come here to the lower left-hand corner and I click on Change Settings, we can see the inflow, outflow, and then so I'm going to go just above that where it says Distance Direction, and I'll click on that. And then we'll click Go again. And now what we're looking at is how many miles people are traveling. So you can see where my cursor is, that 10 to 24 miles, those workers, that's about 29% of the worker population that live in Tampa are traveling out to work. And then we can see 25 to 60. And then we can see greater than 50 miles. And then you can see the radius at the top here. And then if I click on, for example, 25 to 50 miles, and we want to see what that is. And then it updates, and we can see the regions that people are traveling to work 20 to 50 miles. And we can see the north, the northeast, the east, the southeast, and so on. But if you total all of that together, and I'm going back to the main page for the distance direction, but if you total, you know, all of those that are traveling 10 to 24, 25 to 50, and greater than 50, that's, you know, about 60% of the population, the worker population, traveling out of the metropolitan area to work. So just fascinating stuff. So let me go back to the PowerPoint. And then we'll talk about the second one. So in another recent article, the loads data was used to track where workers from a plant in Minnehaha County, South Dakota resided. The data showed that many that worked in Minnehaha also lived in Minnehaha, but the next largest number of workers resided in Lincoln County. The data also found a number of Native Americans who worked at the plant and resided on a nearby reservation where there is a lack of medical resources to a vulnerable population. So using the article on South Dakota, let's recreate this example using OnTheMap. And if you can work with me, let's do it together. So I'm just going to stick to the slideshow, and then I'll jump into a live demo. So if you go to this URL, onthemap.ces.census.gov, and that should take you to our home page, and then you can type in Minnehaha in the search box. And once you type in Minnehaha, go ahead and click search or enter. And then choose the bold Minnehaha under counties for South Dakota. And then once you're there, you get your pop-up, and then you would click on the Perform Area Analysis in blue. And then let me catch up with you all. So let me go live too. And I will reload mine. So I'll go ahead and type in Minnehaha. Click on search. Under counties, Minnehaha County, South Dakota. We can see that there are 5,510 census blocks in that area. Clicking on Perform Analysis. And then I'm going to show you the area profile. So, and I'm going to click Go so you can see an example. So I'm going to click Go, and I have it on 2017. And so an analysis error comes up. And earlier how Eric talked about the different states that are in. This gives you information. So Alaska, we don't have 2017 data, but in Arizona, we don't have 2002. And then if we go down to the bottom, we can see South Dakota, we don't have 2017. So I'm just going to close out of that box. And then I'm going to click on 2016 because that's what the article used. It used the 2016 data. And then I'll click on Go. Sorry for the delay. Another thing I forgot to mention is that if you're using OnTheMap or any of the LEHD data tools, we recommend that you use Chrome or Firefox, mostly because it plays nicely with those two web browsers, because there's so many graphics that has to be uploaded from the maps. So it's coming in, you can see, and on the right-hand side, we can see that there's a total of private primary jobs of 105,195. We can look at the worker age. We can look at the earnings. We can see the next industry sector. So under manufacturing, that would be 10,760,000 workers in Minnehaha, and then, which is a lot of workers. And then if you keep scrolling down, we can see worker race. So it talked about Native Americans, and we can see out of that worker population that there are 1,687 American Indian or Alaska Native alone that work in Minnehaha. And before I get far into this and forget to tell you, yes, you can print up detailed reports. You can print them up to PDF, Excel, or HTML. You can export the geography, so it'll print the chart and the map for you. So then let's also click on Change Settings down in the lower left-hand corner. And then let's go ahead and click on Destination under the Analysis type. And then under Destination type, let's look at counties. So I'll click Go again. And thanks for your patience. Everybody must be working with me. So in the article, it talked about Lincoln County. So on the right-hand side in the table, you can see that Lincoln County came in second. So this is just proving the article and how they use the data. And we can see that those that live in Lincoln County, that's about 16,122, but they work in Minnehaha. So here are the, the workers that work in Minnehaha but are going home to Lincoln County. All right. The other thing that I like about this analysis type is the spoke overlay. And so it's not automatic, it's not default. So you have to actually click on the spoke overlay, which is under the map controls on the left-hand side. And if I click on that, that kind of gives you a visual of where they're coming from or where to work in Minnehaha. So here is the top 10. And then the great thing is that you can click on this key that says identify. This is my favorite feature. So if I click on identify under map controls, and then I'll close out of that little window, and then I'll click on the tip of the spoke, it'll give me more information regarding that area. So we can see that I clicked on Lincoln County, how many workers are in Lincoln County, and then we can look at what their age is. We can look at what their earnings are, and we can see the industry segment that they are in. So all other is probably the manufacturing plant. So I'll close out of that. And then just one more visual just for kicks. I know that there's about 60, I think, maybe, counties in South Dakota, but I'll just go ahead and just click on 25. So that just kind of gives you a visual of those that might have been infected at this plant and where they're all traveling to go home. So just one moment. So we can see what the effect could be regarding people that might have the virus that worked at this plant in Minnehaha and where they're all going home to, from work. All right, back to the PowerPoint. So this is just a lot of links that are very helpful. I just briefly touched on just the tip of what OnTheMap can do. It can do so many other things. It can do custom analyses. It can just, it's just a wonderful data tool. It can look at commuting patterns as you saw. But here are the links. There's a lot of things that can help you walk your way through all the different analyses that we have. That you can learn on your own if you need to, but you can always ask me too. All right, and with that, I will hand it back to Eric.
Thank you, Lee. That was outstanding. We appreciate those examples on how this information, how these tools are really being utilized even in the midst of a pandemic. So I know we got some questions. Usually the number one question everyone has on their minds, maybe we can get to one right now before we finish up and get to the real Q&A, is in regard to the 2018 data and if and when we know when that's going to be added into the data set.
We hope to have that at the end of the year. And then when we do put in the 2018, we will probably try to also add the 2019. So everything will be updated together. Currently, we are just working on putting in the federal workers first.
Great. Thank you for that. So before we get into our Q&A, we just want to sort of plug some of our other additional outlets here for information for you all. So if you are so inclined, you can check out our American Count stories. There's a lot of great ways you can see, other great ways you can see how census data is being used sort of in real-world situations and stories that are being created, new content added on a weekly basis. Pretty much. And then if you want, you can actually subscribe to our newsroom to get updates through various topics or for various topics of interest. So if you want to know when that update for LEC is coming, you might want to subscribe to employment data for under the newsroom. We also have a director's blog and stats for stories. A lot of these different, like America Counts and stats for stories, will have sort of really great visuals embedded into the stories themselves. So I highly recommend that. Oh, sorry, I'm not sure how that happened. Jump back. And we also have a lot of great platforms on social media, so you can check us out there. You can interact with us. We do a lot of visualizations on any particular topic of the day, whether it's something for even International Donut Day. We'll have like a visual on how many donut stores and donuts are consumed, or National Pet Day, or et cetera. So you'll find lots of different visuals that we'll produce just for our social media platforms and content that we love to share through that. Those mediums. And of course, you should already be well aware of Census Academy. We look forward to having you join us for more future webinars. You can also subscribe to Census Academy. It's just something we really highly recommend and encourage you to do, so you're always up to aware of not just our webinars that are upcoming, but even our data gems, short little how-to videos that we produce on how to access data from data tools like OnTheMap or any of the other LHC tools that we have available. And so we also have courses that you can look at and you can access at your own leisure and run through. And more content is being added. There's a lot of great stuff forthcoming with Census Academy. But also share your feedback. If you have an idea for a course or a webinar or a data gem, for that matter, please go ahead and share that feedback with us. We value all feedback, good or bad. So with that, we'll go ahead. I know we've only got about 8 minutes left. We'll go ahead and, operator, if you want to go ahead and queue up any questions that we may have.
Thank you. We will now begin the question and answer session. If you would like to ask a question, please press *1, unmute your phone, and record your name clearly. Your name is required to introduce your question. If you need to withdraw your question, press *2. Again, to ask a question, please press *1. It will take a few moments for the questions to come through. Please stand by.
Hi, everyone. This is your host today, Kimberly Davis, and I just wanted to let you know that a few questions have come up about currency of data in relationship to COVID. So I will put in chat a link to our COVID Hub, a resource about data that we have available and collected in collaboration with other federal agencies, so you can see what activities are going on. We conducted a couple of surveys, and so I'll put the links for the information for both of those COVID Hub resources. Okay, operator, you're welcome to open it up on the phone line. Thank you.
I am showing no questions at this time, so just as a reminder, *1 if you'd like to ask a question.
Well, while we wait for that, I do see some questions in the chat. I think I can try to address. And then, Erlene, if you want to tackle any of those as well, yes, you can ask a question in the chat. Absolutely. So I think there was one I saw in regard to what is the best way to get geospatial on the NAICS within a county. The geospatial information for a county. I'm not sure you can. I'm not sure you can do that within OnTheMap. Unless, Erlene, is that available? I know you can download shape files.
I'm sorry. What was the question? I apologize. I was reading the chat.
Oh yeah, no. So the best way of getting geospatial information on NAICS within a county, I know you can download the information. If I select a county to get data on and do an analysis through OnTheMap, I can then download the map and everything like that. Does it provide the geospatial information?
I want to say yes. But if you would please send me an email and I can double check with our programmers regarding that, but I believe yes. Yes is the correct answer.
Okay. And then someone else has a question in regard to the inflow-outflow changes from year to year. Well, there's a really cool feature on OnTheMap that allows you to actually animate. You can, and I'll go ahead and, since I've got the baton here, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and go to OnTheMap here. Let me go ahead and share real quick. So in OnTheMap, this is just the work analysis, the default here. And you can always come down here and click on Change Settings, and then that will go ahead and open up that analysis tool to allow you to either select, those different variables that you want. To look at the data over time, you just need to go ahead and check these various years, however many you want, as long as that data is there, that it goes back to. Again, you could get an error depending on the location where you're looking at. All right, and then select which jobs you want to look at. And then go ahead and make sure you check inflow outflow. That definitely helps. Click go. And when you check those boxes for multiple years, there's a really cool feature that allows you to, you can look at it year for year just by using the drop-down menu here under the display settings on the left to change that. But you can also go ahead and animate the overlays. So this is really cool. You can actually just click on animate, and it will go ahead and give you that year for year for all those years that you selected and seeing that change. Additionally, for all these different types of analysis, what I found really useful, let me go ahead and stop the animation here, is to go ahead and in that sort of, export geography is that feature we're talking about, shapefile, CSV selection area, etc. You can get a detailed report. And the detailed report for the inflow-outflow is going to give you inflow-outflow. Is going to give you more data than you see here on the right. So on the right of your screen, you get the sort of really focus on that one particular inflow-outflow analysis. But if you click on that detailed report, then you're going to get that breakdown of other characteristics that we see with other sort of selections that we can make, like age groups, income, here we go, more. So you'll get that for each one of those types of analysis that we're looking at, whether it's the jobs, people working within a given area and living in a given area, working outside or living outside and working in a given area, and of course living and or working outside and living in a given area. So there's lots of really great features here. We've only touched on a few, but you can definitely learn more going through some of the different links that are shared in the presentation. You can look at different ways that you can actually draw. If you want to go ahead and clear your selection, you can do that. Make sure you come here and hit no selected layer. And then you can actually, I believe, if I go ahead and clear selection, results, I'll remove my results tab, that helps. And now I can go ahead and draw. So I can click on that draw polygon, and I can zoom all the way down. We're only about halfway in, so if I zoom down even further, I can just kind of click a different area, double tap when you're done, confirm and confirm selection. Once you do that, you can perform an analysis on that area just like that. Super easy. And of course, if you want to upload your shape files, import geography here, that's a really great feature to have. I recommend before you do anything in terms of analysis and doing geographies, if you want to upload shape files, you do that from that start page here before you make any searches. Scroll down, and you're going to find that ability to do that right there. You can also hide tabs, show tabs. You can move all these around. Let me see if I can get rid of that. There we go. If I perform an analysis, if I get that chart, I can slide that around too. So there's lots of great manipulation here that you can see. I'll go ahead and go back.
Hey, Eric, we have a question. Is it possible to map current unemployment data?
Current unemployment data. Well, the feature, the main, so not within this tool, I think you could do that through data.census.gov. Okay. Because everything about OnTheMap is looking at where employees work and where they live. So it's specifically looking for people that are employed. Unemployment data, mapping that, would be maybe, I think maybe even in Census Business Builder has that variable in there.
Okay, and if a user goes with a customized map, how small can the geo go without losing data that may be non-disclosure?
It gets down to for OnTheMap, because of the protections that are already in place and the formulas that are in place, there is data suppression that's occurring. You're just not aware of it. But that's what allows that sort of data protection and the formulas that go in to this particular tool is what allows the data user to get down to the block level within OnTheMap.
And we are at the top of the hour, so I just have one more question before we'll wrap things up here today. If you think it's likely that we'll have the 2018 and 2019 data by the end of 2020, would it be reasonable to think that we might have 2020 before the end of 2021? And I think, Erlene, that
right.
would be more directed to you.
Yes, I can't answer that question. I'm sorry. We don't know.
Okay. Well, thank you both for presenting and going through OnTheMap and jobs data for us today. We appreciate your presentation and your expertise. If we were unable to answer any of your questions, we will follow up with those questions via email. We'd like to thank everyone for joining us today, and join us for our next webinar tomorrow, Tips and Tricks to Accessing Data on Ancestry and Foreign-Born Populations. Thank you, everyone, and have a nice day.
That concludes today's conference. Thank you for participating. You may disconnect this time. Speakers, please allow a moment of silence and stand by for your post-conference.